Back, Rebel fans, you're listening to another episode of the Rebel Talk presented by the Rebel Walk. I'm Cam Wicker, and as always, I'm here with Zach Moreth. And we're here to talk a little bit of portal season for Ole Miss football, a little recap at basketball at the end. It's a wild time in the college football world, really just in the college sports world. It's just a wild time to be a college football fan, college sports fan, just of any college athlete of that caliber. You got Bill Belichick to UNC. You got schools getting out for winter break and players into the transfer portal, thousands and thousands of players. People getting money thrown at them to come to different schools this early. I mean, bowl games haven't even been played yet. Playoffs hasn't even been played yet. It's a wild time in college football, Zach. It's crazy to see how all of this has developed over the years since the portal has become a thing. Just thinking about going back to the early years of Lane Kiffin being at Ole Miss, to him just building those small transfer classes of about 5 to 6 players. And now you look at it now, he's getting 15 guys in the portal every year, number one ranked class. Number one class right now for Ole Miss in the portal. If you saw all over social media these past couple of weeks, Mississippi State's been joking about it. They were number one in the portal class there for a couple of days. It seemed like a bookmark tweet, if you want to say so, for State there, with Ole Miss right below them at second. Now, if you look at it, Ole Miss is at 1. I think State moved down about 7 or 8 there. But it looks like Ole Miss is going to keep moving towards that direction like they do every year. Lane Kiffin seems like he's been racking in a lot of guys, getting a lot of guys on visits. We'll talk about some of those guys. But I want to talk about some of these commits first, Zach.
Yeah.
A good amount of commits so far early in this portal class. You got Luke Haas from Arkansas, Princewell Princey Umamielen's brother from Nebraska, Patrick Kutas from Arkansas, Deshaun Womack from LSU, Jalen Braxton from Arkansas, and PJ Wilkins from Charlotte. Seems like it's a big-time Arkansas class right now. You've seen the jokes about Arkansas being the AAA affiliate of Ole Miss. Not my joke. I've seen that on social media all over the place. It's a pretty funny thing, but it seems like a lot of Arkansas fans and a lot of Arkansas people are upset about that. But, I mean, it's the way of the portal. A lot of these SEC guys are going to transfer to other SEC schools just because they aren't playing at the school they're at, or just didn't like the money that they were getting there. Just who knows what goes into these players' head when they enter these portal spots. But it seems like even with the players that are left on this watch list that we'll talk about, Kiffin and this Ole Miss coaching staff are going after a ton of SEC players, Zach.
No doubt, Cam. And we're in an era of college football, and you see it with different teams around the country. You can look at Indiana, for example, this year. All it takes is one good portal class, and in the snap of your fingers, you have a chance to win the national championship, and you're in the college football playoffs. And I think Lane Kiffin and the staff understand that. So despite being in the Gator Bowl and not exceeding expectations, the vibe is that, look, we can restack our roster. We got Austin Simmons. We can flip this thing around and make a national championship run next year. There's no reason not to. And just a credit to Ole Miss fans and really everyone who donates to the Grove Collective, because, we're outbidding a school like Arkansas at a ridiculous level. We have 3 commits. Their running back just entered the portal, and I fully expect us to try and pursue him. That could be the 4th. I know we're looking at one of their defensive ends too. And they have the Walmart and Tyson Chicken logo on their field. 2 of the richest families, 2 of the richest people in America. And Ole Miss, by association and the number and the volume of people who care about this program, are making, Lane Kiffin and the staff able to spend this money and go get these guys and outbid, the schools with these big-time donors, which is impressive to say the least. But, yeah, we got 6 transfers here, Cam. A couple of them I want to highlight first is, we're going to start with Princewell. I think this is a guy who's going to come in and almost take over his brother's role, which sounds crazy, but I think he's got a ½ inch or an inch more height, maybe a little bit more length, but really similar sizes. And we haven't seen Princewell dominate as Princely did at Florida before he transferred. There's a lot of potential. Princewell has 2 years of eligibility, and the constant, flow that we see with Randall Joyner and Pete Golding is to get these edge rushers and develop them. We saw with Jared Ivey, who was a great player at Georgia Tech, don't get me wrong, but he comes to Ole Miss, spends a couple of years here, and now you're looking at probably a 2nd-round pick. And I think we're going to see something similar from Princewell. He also played a lot of snaps in coverage, so this is a guy who can cover tight ends and running backs. you can move him back to linebacker, a really versatile player who I expect to blossom and eventually become an NFL draft prospect here over the next couple of years. And then the second guy I want to hit on before I'll throw it back to you, Cam, is Deshaun Womack. This was a former five-star in the 2023 class, another player with, I believe, 2 years of eligibility. He committed to Ole Miss early. Was he the first commit, Cam?
I believe so. He was, yeah.
Yeah, so good for him. You know, you could typically tell if a player is good or not by the opposing fan base's reaction, and LSU fans were not happy at all about this one. When he entered the portal, everyone was like, "Oh, we should have played him. We should have played him." So based on that vibe, I'm going to take their word that Womack's a pretty damn good player. It seems like he got caught up behind some of the older guys in that LSU rotation, so he didn't get a lot of playing time this year as he will with Ole Miss next year. But again, he's 6'5", 250. He has that NFL physicality and athleticism. And like we talked about, through the development and the aggression of Pete Golding's defenses, this is a player who will make an immediate impact. So two really good players filling in for a defensive line who's losing almost everyone, Cam.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about like losing a lot of players. Obviously, Walter Nolan declared for the draft earlier today, just minutes before we started this podcast. Walter Nolan declared. We'll talk a little bit about guys playing in the bowl game. It seems like Walter will be playing in that bowl game on January 2nd for Ole Miss. But you're talking about replacing a lot of these guys. It doesn't seem like Ole Miss is going after a lot of guys in the middle right now. We'll probably see some change in that later in this portal class. But it seems like Ole Miss might be comfortable where they're at in the middle of that defensive line right now with Jamarius Brown, Xavier Harris coming back. Yeah, Will Eccles coming in off being top-ranked player in the country last year, the top-ranked player in Mississippi last year. And now he's able to kind of just shine in a role with not sitting behind J.J. Pegues and Walter Nolan next year. So you got three guys that you're bringing back for Ole Miss. We'll probably see them go get someone in the middle eventually. But Deshaun Womack and Prince Will Umamielen seem like they kind of round out this edge for Ole Miss. They're already bringing Suntarine Perkins back. You got Cam Franklin also returning, who didn't really get to play much, but we'll see. He looks like a Jared Ivey type of player. But if you look at Deshaun Womack, also a Jared Ivey type of player, 260, almost like a Princely type of player as well. Zach mentioned his brother Prince Will, a little bit smaller than Princely in size, if you want to compare them to. Zach said he went out in coverage. We didn't see a lot of Princely in coverage. Princely a little bit bigger of a guy. So Prince Will might be a little bit faster and be able to drop back in coverage. You see Suntarine drop back in coverage sometimes in the flats. That might be what Prince Will does here as well. But like Zach said, these are two big-time prospects for Ole Miss to get off the edge. Deshaun Womack played at St. Francis Academy in Baltimore. If you watch high school football, any of those guys are always on national television.
Yes.
Womack was a top 25 player in the country out of high school. Like Zach said, he got caught up behind some guys at LSU. Seems like LSU tries to play those LSU guys, play those Louisiana guys a little bit more, even though they have top-ranked players. I don't know why they've done that over the years. I guess it's a way of keeping your Louisiana guys in town and knowing that they're going to play when they get there. So Deshaun Womack, like Zach said, he was first player to commit to Ole Miss. I believe he visited on the 10th, committed maybe 2 days later to Ole Miss when the portal kind of was really just starting to open it up. And it seems like Ole Miss is really trying to commit heavy on this defensive line right now. Just like they did a year ago, it seems like players are starting to flock towards Pete Golden in these transfer portal classes. We've seen it out of the high school classes. A lot of players are wanting to team up with Pete Golden and see what they can do with him and get developed into that next level. You see guys like Walter, like Pegues, like Ivy, like Princely, who are going to go pro this year. And I think a lot of prospects are starting to see that, and it's big for Ole Miss. It's big for Ole Miss to be able to bring in these big time prospects, guys who were once top players in the country at one point and still top transfer players in the country.
Luke Haas, guy's an animal. I actually remember recording a podcast with Cam, and we were talking about the tight end from Arkansas during Arkansas week. This is a guy who catches a lot of touchdowns, 6'3", not the biggest body, but he's more efficient in the passing game than the running game regardless. He's a great route runner. I know that's in his draft evaluation. And another player who's similar to Daquan Wright is going to come in and get involved heavily over the middle of the field, maybe on some deep balls too. The kid can move a little bit. And he's from Bixby, Oklahoma. I'm very kind of surprised he didn't commit to Oklahoma. So more credit to Lane Kiffin and his staff for being able to land him. Jalen Braxton Kid was a freshman All-SEC player in 2023, was battling an injury in 2024, did not play a lot. But, if he stays healthy, he has the potential to turn into your next Trey Amos, the guy who can go out there and lock up anybody, and ultimately prevent, an opposing wide receiver from having the game of their life. Jalen Braxton, 2 years of eligibility. And that's one of the things we're seeing with this transfer portal class. Luke Haas, Prince Will, Womack, Jalen Braxton, these guys have several years to develop. And that's exactly what didn't happen, in last year's portal class. So that's exciting. And then Patrick Kudos, there was a quote from him, I think earlier this year, that he, quote, hated Ole Miss. Really, that's the era of college football we're in, guys. Patrick Kudos says he hates Ole Miss. He doesn't like Ole Miss, whatever the case was. And we're here in December, and he commits here. I know his girlfriend goes to Ole Miss. I'm sure that had something to do with it. But at the end of the day, Patrick's coming to develop and turn into an NFL prospect at the University of Mississippi after being at Arkansas for a great deal of time. I don't expect Kudos. I think he may only have 1 year of eligibility, but regardless, this is a 6'6", 315-pound guy, great interior offensive lineman who's effective in the run. This guy will be in the NFL draft next year. And this is a player who you really needed in the offense of 2024, Cam. Ole Miss could not run the football. And with Patrick Kudos, he's going to get a push on whatever side of the line he's in. So those are the 3 Arkansas guys we got. PJ Wilkins, Cam, this is another commit. The final one we're going to talk to you guys about, because there are only 6 at the time we're recording this. He's transferring from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Another huge body, a guy who can play tackle, he can play interior offensive line, but, similar to Kudos, he's going to get you a push in the run game. And that's, I think the staff realized, hey, this offense is not nearly as effective if we can't run the football. So you go out and you get Kudos and PJ Wilkins to start the transfer portal cycle. That's a pretty good start, if you ask me, up front.
Absolutely. And Zach brought up a good point off camera not too long ago to me and Evie about how this Ole Miss team, maybe you want to cut them a little bit of slack if you're a fan and you want to kind of move past this year and watching the football this year for Ole Miss. This is the first season that Lane Kiffin really didn't have a run attack, an effective run attack for Ole Miss. I'm not saying that this running back room wasn't capable, because it was more than capable of producing at some point in this season if you would have balanced a little bit more of Henry Parrish and Bentley. But that's in the past, and we can't really explain what that situation was now. But this is we have seen in the past Lane Kiffin use running backs, whether it's Quinshon all year, or Zach Evans and Quinshon, or Snoop Connor and Ely and Henry Parrish. He uses these guys by committee, and you really didn't see that a lot this year. And I think that's what this team is looking to move back forward to. This team wants to get heavy on the front on the offensive line. PJ Wilkins is 6'7", 330 pounds, big guy. You got guys that are going out, like the Washington guys. You got Diego Pounds, who's about that size as well. And then Micah Pettis, who was rumored to enter the portal earlier today, but confirmed on his social media that he is not in the portal, that it was false reports. So not sure about what that situation is right now, but as of right now, it seems like Micah Pettis is not in the portal for Ole Miss. Not a lot of big names in the portal for Ole Miss so far off the top of my head. Walker Howard is committed to ULL, University of Louisiana Lafayette, and Rashad Amos, backup running back for Ole Miss, is entered the portal as well. I believe he's the highest ranked portal player for Ole Miss right now that is left Ole Miss. But like Zach said, these Arkansas commits are going to be big time for Ole Miss moving into the year. Jalen Braxton can be a Trey Amos type of player. We see Trey Amos come from places like LSU and Bama and then come right away, and really wasn't a first-round pick when he came to Ole Miss. And now you look at mock draft, you look at draft boards. Trey Amos is a projected first-round pick, late first-round pick, early second-round pick. And I believe Jalen Braxton could be that type of player. He has that similar type of build to Trey Amos. And if you watch him play in a small amount of playing time at Arkansas so far, you can see he can be one of those type of players. And like Zach said with Kudos as well, Kudos is a big guy. Ole Miss needs that push in the run game up front. And obviously, Luke Haas, you bring in 2 tight ends as well. You see Ole Miss run the 2 tight end system last year when Luke Haas was playing Ole Miss a couple weeks early in the season this year. It seemed like Ole Miss was kind of focused on Luke Haas in that game and worrying about kind of just taking him out of the game for Taylor Green with no run game really in that game for Arkansas. So with these Arkansas guys coming in for Ole Miss, These are big-time SEC players. These are guys with SEC experience. These are guys who were 4 or 5-star players out of high school, and these are players that are probably going to make immediate impacts at Ole Miss. And it seems like this is why Kiffin and Golden and all these other members of the coaching staff go after these SEC players, so you can get that experience. You got these guys playing in big-time environments. You got these guys who were used to the attention out of high school, and I think that's what Kiffin does a lot more. You've heard him talk about it in the past. He looks more into the background of these players before he actually makes the decision to get them on campus, and you're seeing that a lot more this year with the amount of big-time players from big-time programs that Kiffin is going after. That moves me into the watch list. For Ole Miss right now, you got a lot of guys on this watch list, Zach. As of right now, the biggest name is Eric Singleton Jr., who was the number 1 ranked portal player in this year's class. But John Matier from Washington State, quarterback, he just entered the portal today, became the number 1 ranked player. I believe they have the same type of ranking, I think Matier might be a 95. Eric Singleton's probably a 94, around that same area. So Singleton, one of the best players in the portal, if not the best, whatever you see it in your eyes. If you watch the tape, he's a big ball. I mean, a big playmaker on the football. He seems like he plays a lot bigger than what he is. He's 5'11", 190. He goes up and gets the football. You can get him out in space with the screen. And he's got one thing you can't teach, and that's speed. And I think that's what is making him the number 1 player in this class, just because if you get him out in space, he's really hard to catch. He's a dynamic player, playing 2 seasons at Georgia Tech, 700 yards in both seasons. I believe he had more touchdowns in his freshman season. He's got 2 years eligibility left, looking to be an NFL prospect. And if you come here to Ole Miss to be a receiver, you know what Kiffin's going to do. If he has a top receiver in the country, he's going to give him the football. So I think Eric Singleton has a big shot of landing here at Ole Miss. He visited on the 13th, I believe, stayed for 2 days when he visited. So it seems like Ole Miss is moving in the right direction for Eric Singleton Jr., Zach.
Yeah, things are in a great spot from what it sounds like. Eric Singleton, unfortunately, is going to Texas and Miami this week. So, those are 2 schools with a lot of money. I'd expect them to offer pretty reasonable deals towards this kid because, he's 5'11" and he can do it all. He reminds me a little bit of Elijah Moore in Ole Miss's offense a few years ago. He can go, down the field and moss a 6'2" cornerback, and he can also get like a motion handoff. He can line up as a running back. He can do everything. And this is exactly the type of player that Ole Miss needs in a wide receiving room who, similar to the defensive line and a bunch of other positions, is losing a lot of good players. He almost reminds me a little bit of Jordan Watkins, but you can use him in a more dynamic sense. Like I said, you can line him up at running back. You can put him in the slot. You can put him outside like they did with Watkins. A lot of moving around and versatility with a player who has the potential to be an elite NFL prospect. So if you're Lane Kiffin, it's probably a guy you want to get after. Really quickly, Cam, okay, with Micah Pettis, he did announce for the transfer portal, but the rumor was that he was dismissed from the team. And that's what he was saying. That's not true.
Okay.
Just real quick, I want to touch on that. But again,
Okay.
we'll see where he goes. Interesting situation that I don't have a lot of information on. Staying on the topic of wide receivers, though, Dane Key, a name that kind of hurts me to say, Cam. This guy came into the vault and had that one diving touchdown in the end zone, I believe, and ultimately helped Kentucky defeat Ole Miss, which, looking back, kind of ruined our playoff chances, which it's tough for me to even talk about. I'll never forget being in the stadium that day. But Dane Key's 6'2", really physical player. And, I just talked about it. You're losing your best outside wide receiver, Trey Harris. You need a guy to come fill that role. You need a guy who can go down in the end zone and catch a Hail Mary ball. And Dane Key seems to be that guy. Especially, I want to keep your eyes out with the Singleton commitment, because let's say Singleton commits to Texas or Miami this week. I would expect Ole Miss to take all the money they were offering to Singleton and put it in with Key, because you got to land one of them. And if you can land both, great. But those are 2 very expensive packages. So if they don't land Singleton, I expect Key. If they land Singleton, I'd say the chances are probably a little smaller with Dane Key, but another electric player who has the chance to come in here with 1 year of eligibility and be special. Then the final wide receiver I want to talk about is Deson Stribling from Oklahoma State. This was kind of an under-the-radar visit. I believe he was at Ole Miss this past weekend on December 14th and 15th. Another guy with 1 year of eligibility coming from Oklahoma State, but still 6'2", 220 pounds. The dude is a large human being, and we need these guys. We need these guys to block. We need these guys to go down and catch those passes, as I was talking about. But he wrapped up his 2024 season of 52 receptions for 882 yards and 6 touchdowns. So when you get in the red zone, you throw the ball to Stribling, and that's what Oklahoma State did. You'd imagine that's what Ole Miss will do with a guy like this. But almost an 1,000-yard season from him. And between him, Dane Key, and Eric Singleton, I would keep your eyes out for a commitment post from one of the three sometime within the next week here, Cam.
Absolutely. And like Zach says, between those three guys, it's going to be for Ole Miss. You probably won't land all three, or maybe not even two of them, just because of the caliber of those receivers and the playing time that those guys are going to want to have once they land somewhere. So like Zach said, if Ole Miss doesn't get Singleton, look for them to move towards Key or Stribling. If you watch Stribling on tape, he's a one-on-one threat. Usually they just sets him outside by himself, and they'll just throw it up to him and let him big body other smaller DBs and just be physical out there. If you watch Dan Key this previous season, he's a big physical receiver as well. If you watched him 2 years ago in 2022 and Ole Miss played and Will Levis was the quarterback for Kentucky, he was destroying Ole Miss in pretty much every facet of the game. He was taking jet sweeps. He was returning kicks. He was catching the ball. Dan Key is all over the place. He can be used in many different areas, but he's a really physical receiver, like Zach said. And some other receivers, seems like Ole Miss is heavy on just targeting receivers in this class right now. C.J. Daniels from LSU, he's scheduled to visit. He visited on the 14th. You have Chase Soul, who from East Carolina. He is offered by Ole Miss right now. No visit scheduled as of right now. And then Michael Sturdivant from UCLA on the watch list. I don't think there's any offer or any type of scheduling right now for a visit, but Sturdivant is a big body receiver as well, a lanky guy. Seems like UCLA uses him as a deep ball threat, throw it over the top to him. He has the length and the size. And then also Caleb Odom from Bama. Ole Miss was big on him last year out of high school. 6'5", 220, big guy. I believe he played tight end out of high school. Bama moved him to receiver. He's got the speed. He's got the size. And it seems like Ole Miss is going to need one of those guys to bring in. Losing Trey Harris, losing their outside threat, losing their jump ball threat. Ole Miss is going to need that guy. Caleb Cunningham could be that jump ball threat, but who knows? He's a true freshman. You don't want to push that guy into the spotlight right away if he's not ready. So you want to be able to recruit another physical receiver, and it seems like that's the only type of receiver Ole Miss is going after in this class, other than Singleton Jr., who just happens to be the best player in the portal, and Ole Miss is always probably going to go after the best player in the portal every year. Moving on to some other names that Ole Miss has been looking at in this portal class right now. It seems like Ole Miss is going to add another quarterback. We've seen it in the past. Kiffin added Spencer Sanders a couple years ago to back up Jackson Dart. It seemed like Jackson Dart was the clear favorite right away, but we all knew that it was kind of just to put some fire under Dart and kind of maybe make him compete, develop a little bit better towards the season. Seems like that's what Kiffin's going to do with Simmons this year. The only guy on the radar right now, Anthony Colandrea from Virginia. He visited on the 14th. If you look at his stats, he gets the ball out quick, similar to Simmons. Seems like it's a similar play to Simmons. Those from the right side, though, a little bit smaller in stature. But seems like Kiffin's going to go after someone to make Simmons compete for this job. Obviously, Simmons is going to be playing baseball. We'll have to see what he does in the spring, but it's not going to be easy selling for Simmons. So hopefully Kiffin can bring in someone to make this a little bit more competitive in the spring and fun to watch. That's all we got really for quarterbacks, and we'll move into, I guess, the running backs right now, which I think is the biggest spot for Ole Miss that you really want to go after right now. Zach Justice Haynes, number one ranked running back in the portal right now in Alabama. He is scheduled to visit on the 17th tomorrow. He will be visiting Ole Miss. Big-time prospect out of high school, big body running back. I believe if you can land this guy, that's all you could ask for Ole Miss. You have Logan Diggs coming back likely with the medical red shirt. You have Shakai Mills-Knight coming in, really big running back out of high school. If you can add one more transfer back, me and Zach have talked about this in the past. This is really set up for success for Ole Miss. You've seen them do it in past years. You got two backs. You bring in one more. We saw it when they did it with Bentley, and you had Quinshon and Zach Evans. You bring in one more back, and you can bring that pressure off those two backs that you already have. That's going to be big for Ole Miss. And then Ahmad Hardy from ULM. 1,000 yards last year. I don't believe he was ranked at all out of high school. Kind of just bursted onto the scene. He visited early in this portal class, I believe on the 11th of December. So those two names right there, and then obviously Zach will talk about these other two guys who are just on the watch list for Ole Miss right now.
Yeah, so you mentioned Haynes, an elite player who would come in and start immediately at Ole Miss. I was talking about the vibe from other schools when these guys enter the portal, and with Justice Haynes, we're sad to see him go because he was playing behind a lot of players at Alabama, but they understand it because Alabama fans understand that Haynes is that next level running back. He just wasn't getting as much of an opportunity as he would like. And coming out of played high school, Buford, a really competitive school, the dude is simply trained, to be an elite running back, to study film, to get his workouts in. He's a really disciplined guy. 448 yards on 79 carries, averaging 5 yards a carry. This is something that Ole Miss needs badly. And Ahmad Hardy I really like the speed he plays with. I know he played at ULM, but a guy who I feel if you get him in the room of SEC running backs can definitely compete for the number one spot, if not that number two spot on a running back room with a lot of question marks right now. And then the final two guys we're going to touch on is Braylon Russell from Arkansas, who started a decent amount of games when that Arkansas starting running back got hurt. I think he played a little bit against Ole Miss, but he's 6'1", 250 pounds. And just by the nature of being, the Ole Miss AAA affiliate, I would say Ole Miss is probably going to pursue Braylon Russell, especially when you have guys who he played all year with in Patrick Kudus and Luke Haas on the offensive side of the ball, and then the cornerback who we just landed a commitment from playing on the defensive side of the ball. The relationships are there. That's going to be up for Lane Kiffin and the staff to get him in and ultimately, present him the right offer. And then the final guy who really hit, I think, the portal this morning was Kewan Lacey from Missouri. He was a true freshman last year. He's from the Dallas area, really competitive player, but he was going to commit to Ole Miss until about 30 minutes before his commitment when Mizzou came with a last-minute offer. And he played his first year at Mizzou, collected his paycheck, and now he's out. So expect Ole Miss and Kevin Smith to pursue him. They have an established relationship, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got him in for a visit as well. But those are four names that Ole Miss can easily land a commitment from, I would say, one of them. The goal should be two, though, because the problem with this year's running back room was we're not going to dive into the personnel stuff because that was the biggest problem. But another problem was depth. And when Parrish got hurt and Logan Diggs was out, there were definitely some problems and some names that we didn't really know a whole lot about. You look at Dominic Thomas taking some snaps there, even in that Georgia game, that's a problem that you don't want to have, especially with a Lane Kiffin offense that needs an established run game like we talked about earlier. So Braylon Russell, Kewan Lacey, definitely two names to keep an eye out for, but Justice Haynes coming in here Tuesday night is probably the biggest name. I think he'll visit South Carolina later in the week. So you probably want to wrap up his commitment if you want him desperately on Tuesday or Wednesday when he's in Oxford, Mississippi, Cam.
Absolutely. Ole Miss is going to need a big-time running back out of this portal, and if you can go land a couple more or just one more, that would be great. I would really like to see Ahmad Hardy in an Ole Miss uniform. I don't know, just watching those highlights, he's a really speedster type of back, has that size. I believe he's about 200 pounds.
Yeah.
And like I said, he was unranked out of high school, so this kid's an underdog. It seems like Kiffin likes going after those underdog players who are just gritty and willing to put in the work, and looks like Hardy's one of those players. So Ole Miss will be heavily pursuing running backs in this portal. And this next position that we talked about, really not heavily pursued from Ole Miss right now. You have the two commits in Wilkins and Kudus, but the offensive line spot for Ole Miss, the only other name other than those two right now on my board is Delano Townsend from UAB. He visited on the 13th of December. Big body in the middle. I believe he's 6'4", 320 pounds, 315 pounds. Haven't really watched a lot of film on him, but he's the only name other than those two that have committed to Ole Miss on the offensive line. What do you think about that, Zach? What do you think about this offensive line class right now? Obviously, they added some guys from the high school one as well. You haven't really had a lot of guys on the offensive line enter the portal. You have some guys coming back, but you have guys leaving as well. It seems like Ole Miss is going to have to go after some more names on the offensive line at some point.
No doubt. I think you got to land one or two more guys, preferably maybe a tackle. I understand you have Jaden Williams and Diego Pounds both coming back, but Jaden Williams has, battled injuries for his entire career. I think Bryson Sanders is going to have a chance to compete for a starting role here. 6'6", 310. He's developed at Ole Miss. He's an Ole Miss guy, like always tweeting, always recruiting, doing the most for Ole Miss. So I'd expect him to make a pretty decent case to be your starting center. You're losing a lot. It's similar to the defensive line situation. You're losing a lot of players. The two Washington guys, Pettis is in the portal. Reese McIntyre is out of eligibility. Jeremy James is out. Eli Acker. Those depth pieces are out. So you got to go out and, even if it's just a depth player, you got to start landing a few more guys. And, whether it's, now or the spring cycle, you got to get a couple more players here. I do want to talk about really quickly, Cam. There are players from 12 teams who simply really aren't entering the portal right now because of the college football playoffs. So I want
Absolutely.
everyone to take a second and remember, teams like Texas, Clemson, Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Tennessee, teams filled with NFL caliber players who typically enter the transfer portal if they're not satisfied at their school, are staying locked in because of the college football playoffs. So another absolute shot towards the NCAA in this horrible system that they've created. The Penn State backup quarterback, he had to enter the transfer portal because Drew Aller's coming back. Well, now Penn State doesn't have a backup quarterback for their college football playoff game. It's a horrible system, but I want everyone to remember that there's a long list of players that Ole Miss is going to pursue who are on these rosters right now. So keep your eyes out for that once these teams ultimately get eliminated. But you need a few more offensive line, Cam. And then we'll talk about a little bit Pooh Paul. Credit to him and the Paul family for entering the NFL draft. I think Pooh is a complete under the radar player. I see him going somewhere in the second round there, Cam, but a guy who's going to make an immediate impact. Just the way he plays the game, the energy and the discipline he brings, and the heart. He really brought a serious amount of passion towards Ole Miss, and he is one of my favorite players to ever watch on a football field. But with that being said, you kind of have to fill this role. I know TJ Daugherty is going to come in and probably be that leader in the linebacker room, but you got to go out and get a couple more linebackers. And I know Prince Will can play linebacker, but he'll probably line up on the edge a lot. Same things with Suntarian Perkins. But this Texas transfer, Darian Gullett, he's going to visit Ole Miss on Wednesday. 6'3", 245 pounds. This is a beast we're talking about. He has a lot of eligibility, I believe 3 years. And he's visiting Mississippi State earlier in the week. So if you can, keep him away from state, land him, and allow him to develop under Pete Golding, I think the ceiling's high for Gullett. But I know there's another guy you want to talk about as well in that linebacker room, Cam.
Absolutely. Andrew Jones from Grambling State, you watch him play. He's a big body, I believe about 6'2", 225. If you look at his stature, he looks a little bit bigger than that, actually. If you look at previous years for Ole Miss, he kind of reminds me of a Troy Brown type of player. Just goes after the football, pursues the football. Seems like Ole Miss is going to pursue him at some point. And also Amari Campbell from UNC, also bigger body like Andrew Jones, plays in the middle of that field. Like Zach said, you probably have TJ Daugherty coming back as the leader of that linebacker room next year. I believe he wore the earpiece for Ole Miss this year, had Pete Golden in his ear for most of the season when he was on the field.
Yeah.
So Daugherty is going to be a leader on that field next year for Ole Miss, no doubt. You're pretty comfortable leaving him in that spot for that role at middle linebacker. But you got to go get one or two other guys to put there beside him, just because Ole Miss doesn't really recruit heavy at that middle linebacker spot. Even when you see Ole Miss get linebackers out of high school, most of the time, it's a lot of edge rushers, a lot of guys who are going to drop back into the flats and rush the quarterback off the edge. So seeing what Pooh Paul and Daugherty have done here over the past year, it's very encouraging for that middle of the field for Ole Miss. And seeing Pooh Paul being a projected second-round pick at this point, middle second-round pick, it seems like Ole Miss is moving in that direction where they'll start picking up more of these middle linebackers that we see Georgia pick up, that we see LSU pick up, guys who are 6 foot 240 and just going to play quarterback in the middle of the field on defense. And that's what you're going to need from some of these portal guys if you can go get them. And I believe Ole Miss is in a good spot with not having a lot of depth at that spot. You're going to want to have to bring guys in and show them that, hey, we don't have anybody here. You'll be probably starting right away. come play at Ole Miss in the middle of the field. So the linebacker spot, the running back spot, the offensive line spot, those are really big spots to look at for Ole Miss moving into this portal season. Like Zach said, a lot of big names from these other teams in the playoffs, other teams from in bowl games are going to start entering the portal as well as their season ends with the teams they're currently on. But a lot of big names for Ole Miss right now. Another big name that I, off the top of my head, right, that I got right here, Nico Davlier from Arkansas.
Yeah.
Really highly rated player out of high school, visiting Ole Miss tomorrow. Like Zach said, Arkansas players seem like they're flocking to Ole Miss right now. It seems like a lot of players on the Arkansas roster, when they enter the portal, just immediately are getting connected to Ole Miss. You also have TJ Metcalf, safety from Arkansas, getting connected to Ole Miss. It seems like Ole Miss is going after these SEC guys, like I've said over and over again. So it's going to be exciting to watch. It's going to be exciting to see how this portal class continues to unfold as teams from bigger schools in the playoffs start to get rid of some of their players, and some of these players start to enter the portal. But I believe that's all I got for most of these guys, Zach, unless you got some other names.
Yeah, I'm going to hit on two more here really quickly in the secondary, Cam. Charles Brantley from Michigan State. He'll visit this week. Just an electric player. Cam and I were talking about it before. But if you go watch his film, an absolute ball hawk. He plays corner as if he's the receiver trying to catch the ball. He had 3 interceptions, 27 total tackles, a lengthy guy who is going to come in and play, simply put. This is a secondary who's losing lots and lots of players. And that seems to be the theme for the entire Ole Miss roster. You know, if you're asking me, this was the season known as the Last Dance. And with that being said, a lot of these players are out of eligibility or are going to pursue their dreams in the NFL. But he was an all Big Ten honorable mention, 6-foot guy, lengthy player, like I mentioned, guy who's going to come in and play right away. And then David Johnson of 247 Sports actually just reported this morning, Mansour Delane out of Virginia Tech is planning on visiting Ole Miss later tonight. It looks like he'll arrive in Oxford. But he's rated as the number 2 DB in the transfer portal. He visited LSU on Sunday, and looks like he might visit Alabama and Oregon in the future. So this is a player who you're going to want to land if you're Pete Golding, Cam. If you ask me, the guy who's visiting LSU, looking to visit Alabama and Oregon, tells me he's pretty damn good. I don't know too much about him. I know he's got 1 year of eligibility, but this is a player who you need. Like, there's no excuse for Ole Miss to not throw a reasonable package at this kid and ultimately try and land his commitment by tomorrow, because, you know, Ole Miss proved that if you have a couple decent players in your secondary, you can really start to limit the opposing team's passing game. And you have Braxton from Arkansas, but you need 1 or 2 more corners, whether it's the Michigan State or the Virginia Tech kid. You know, you got to bring a couple guys in here as we head towards the back end of December. Those are 2 names definitely to keep your eyes out for.
Absolutely. And I believe, like Zach said, if you have big names in that secondary who can limit other SEC receivers and allow that defensive front for Pete Golden to get to the quarterback, that's all you really need. And you only really had one guy last year, right, in Trey Amos, who was a lockdown guy who would pretty much lock up your number 1 receiver. If you can get 1 or 2, maybe 3 of those guys on the Ole Miss roster, this defense can be even better than they were that you saw this past year. And if you ask me, as an Ole Miss fan over the years, it seems like this is probably the best defense we've seen, at least in the past decade, for Ole Miss. And if you can keep building off of this year and keep using that same formula, I believe it's very, very, very high expectations for Ole Miss heading into next year, depending on who they land in this class this coming up year. I believe that's all we got for the portal guys right now. Touch a little bit on the bowl game on January 2nd, Gator Bowl versus Duke. As of right now, per Ole Miss social media, it seems like a lot of players are playing in this bowl game. A lot of players who are seniors who may be entering the draft who haven't entered yet. Like I said earlier, Walter was pictured at these practices. You had guys like John Sanders, Trey Amos, Jackson Dart, who were all pictured at these practices. Some of these guys have already said that they were playing in this bowl game as well. But it's good to see that a lot of players aren't really opting out of this game. I believe as of right now, Trey Harris and Chris Pupal are the only 2 guys that really just for sure aren't playing in this game for Ole Miss. If you're talking about big games, and then the other storyline is Duke starting quarterback Malik Murphy will not be playing in this game for Duke, who's already in the portal. Seems like he's moving towards Miami, Florida State, Auburn right now. very strange system. Kiffin talked about it. It's kind of ruining this kind of season of college football when it comes to the bowl when it comes to bowl time right now. If you're not really in the playoffs, your team's playing in a bowl game, it doesn't really matter because most of your team might be in the portal at that point. So it's kind of hard for some teams such as Duke to compete against Ole Miss in these games. But as an Ole Miss fan, I'm excited for Ole Miss to go play in Jacksonville, play one last time to get to see all these guys suit up one last time in the Ole Miss uniform. Should be a good one down there in Jacksonville.
It's gonna be fun, Cam, and unfortunately, I won't be in attendance. But I can tell you right now, I will definitely be tuning in. In addition to the starting Duke quarterback entering the transfer portal, their backup entered as well. So the third string, whoever it is for Duke, I apologize. I guess I think this Ole Miss defensive line is simply going to eat. We've talked about it all year. We've said it probably 1,000 times today. This is one of the best defensives ever at Ole Miss. And with the amount of players that are coming back and opting into this game, like Walter Nolan, Trey Amos, Princely hasn't said anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if he plays. I'm pretty confident JJ Pegues is going to play. Jared Ivey's playing. I think Ole Miss should win by 3+ scores and send a message that we probably shouldn't be in the Gator Bowl. But, we're a 3-loss team. I understand it. I understand the process. It's all good. The goal should be to get that 10th win and then ultimately move every single ounce of focus into next season, into what Austin Simmons and what this transfer portal class can do. But I will say, I think the Ole Miss staff has done maybe one of the best jobs in the entire country of retaining a lot of their players. And this isn't a disrespect to anybody in the transfer portal. These are guys who you almost would expect to transfer, and no one who you're really concerned about transferring at the same time. No disrespect. I want to make that very clear. But there are guys on rosters across the country who, when they lose a player, everyone on Twitter is freaking out because, oh, why is he transferring? Where is he going to go? We don't want him to go to this school. And that's not the case for Ole Miss. You could see guys like Suntarian Perkins who would ask for a ridiculous amount of money. And if they don't get it, they'd hop in the transfer portal. And we haven't seen that. So I really want to give even more props and more kudos to Pete Golding and Lane Kiffin and this entire staff because they are killing it, not only in recruiting players, but also retaining their current roster.
Absolutely. And we've had some names that we talked about off camera that we maybe even thought were going to enter the portal when this time of year came up. And those names aren't in the portal right now. So this, like Zach said, this Ole Miss staff is doing a great job of making sure these guys stay, making sure a lot of these big names don't enter the portal early for Ole Miss. Who knows who went to the portal as the bowl games end for Ole Miss. But as of right now, not a lot of big names. Like Zach said, no disrespect to any of these guys in the portal right now, but not a lot of names who played in these previous years for Ole Miss who are in the portal right now. I believe that's all we got right now for college football, for portal season, for recruiting for Ole Miss. We'll touch a little bit on college basketball before we get away from you guys today. I want to talk a little bit about women's basketball. Currently ranked 22nd in the country. I believe I jinxed them a little bit in our last podcast. Zach talked a little bit about a game that they should handle against NC State. They had a slow start in that game, looked bad at the start. Came back at the end, only lost by 6. Seemed like they were pushing in the end. Tough environment at NC State. I believe NC State is ranked now after that win over Ole Miss. But talked about it with Coach Yo at the last game. They have 3 losses against 3 really good teams. Mostly all those games were fairly close. Obviously, the UConn game, I believe, was a 13-point loss. UConn's second-ranked team in the country right now. It seems like this Ole Miss team is moving in the right direction, projected a 6th seed in the latest brachiology. Last game, they had a 94-39 win over South Alabama. And I say it every podcast, Sierra Chinoo, 30 minutes, 23 points, 7 boards, 2 assists in that last game. She leads Ole Miss in scoring right now with 12 points per game. I ask Coach Yo about her all the time when after these games in the press conferences, and she continues to say that she's one of the best freshmen in the country. Obviously, she's not playing as much as maybe some of the other freshmen in the country, like we've seen in previous years, like Juju Watkins, Anna Hidalgo, some of those girls who played right away and were playing 35 minutes a game and dropping and providing number 1 scoring options for their team. And yes, Chinoo is the number 1 scoring option right now for Ole Miss, but that's probably not what you want. If you're Ole Miss, you probably want Maddie Scott, you probably want Kennedy Todd Williams and that starting and that leading scoring role. And really, I wouldn't say they're struggling right now, Maddie Scott and Kennedy Todd Williams, but maybe not the caliber we've seen them play last year. That's a lot of credit to what Coach Yo did in this offseason with building this team. Tamia Sadler had eight assists in that last game. KK Deans didn't play a lot, still getting a little bit healthy off that last year's injury. But it seems like Coach O just built a team that can win together rather than just focusing on one player. Christina Weil has been a force off the bench on the defensive end. Star Jacob's been a force in the starting role. She's been a force on the offensive end. It seems like they have a three-player rotation on that front court with Carissa Richardson added in there as well. It seems like this Ole Miss women's basketball team's headed in the right direction with SEC play coming up. They play Mississippi Valley State at noon on December 21st. And they're just one of the best defensive teams in the country right now. I believe they're number one in scoring defense in the country right now. I believe they're only allowing like 47.5 points right now. It seems like this Ole Miss team is heading in the perfect direction with SEC play right around the corner.
Yeah, they're peaking nicely, Cam, and I thought they responded really well against Tennessee State, following the NC State loss, because it was defeating. Honestly, it was a game we expected to win. We expected to see Coach O, Ole Miss, go out there and kind of dominate and get that marquee win on the road there at NC State. It didn't happen, but that's all right. You bounce back, and in the last two games, you give up 38 and 39 points. So the defense is there, and the next step for them is winning this big game. And you're not going to really have a chance to do that in the SEC. I wouldn't say is the best women's basketball conference, which I believe it is for the men's. But conference play is coming up here, January 2nd. That's probably you're looking at 2.5 weeks here. You go on the road to Auburn. Before that, you help play Mississippi Valley, like Cam mentioned, and then Alcorn State to top it off with your non-cons. And you got to continue to keep this mindset of, we're winning. We're winning by a lot of points, but we're also playing teams who are relatively uncompetitive. And the biggest thing for me for this team is going to be understanding that and taking an approach into those bigger games that, we kind of have to get over the hump here. Prove that we can compete with anybody in the country. And I believe they can. They just got to go out there and show it. They're going to have plenty of opportunities to do so. It's still very early too, Cam. There's a lot of developing and moving pieces, especially with this freshman playing out of her mind. So we'll see. A lot of moving parts, but conference play starts in early January, and that's when you like to start to see the stars align a little bit through January, February, leading up to March and March Madness. So, but a lot of good things to come for this team.
Absolutely. Like I said, they play next on December 21st at noon in the SJB against Mississippi Valley State. We're moving to SEC play. Like Zach said, they won't play a lot of big-time competition early in that SEC play. I believe they'll play South Carolina at home later in the SEC play season. I believe they have to travel to LSU later in the SEC season. And I believe they play Tennessee some point in this SEC season. And I don't think Tennessee is getting the respect they deserve right now, but they are one of the number one offensive teams in the country right now as well. So that's going to be 3 matchups to look forward to in the SEC for Ole Miss women's basketball. That moves me into men's basketball right now. Last game, they had a 77-46 win over Southern Miss in Biloxi at a neutral site, I guess. It's kind of closer to Southern Miss, but it seemed like Ole Miss kind of handled that really well. Padula was off to a hot start in that game. I believe he hit like 4 or 5 threes right away in that game. Him and Juju Murray combined for 10 threes in that game and 32 points. It seems like those two in the front court, I've talked about it with you in the past, Zach. It seems like that's a really good combo right now. Juju Murray seems to elevate his game just a little bit from last year as far as scoring. We see him play a little bit better defense. And I've talked to you about this before too, Zach. It seems like Padula and Murray kind of just play point guard. Whoever wants to play point guard, they'll play it. Juju will play at this game. Sean Padula will play at this game. It seems like whoever's got the hot hand, they'll continue shooting. And if the other guy's not hot, they'll pass it off and let the other guy score. So I think they have a good combination right there with those two guys. And obviously, Eduardo Klafke off the bench, who's been anything you can really ask for Chris Beard as a true freshman. Coming from Brazil, coming from that NBA academy, it seemed like he was ready to play right away. It seemed like Beard was kind of skeptical and kind of trying to humble him a little bit and make sure people weren't hyping him up too much. And I think it worked because a lot of people kind of looked over him, but it seems like Klafke's kind of making his name, his presence felt on that court a lot now, especially on the defensive end, just bringing the energy for Ole Miss every time he comes off the bench. Devon Barnes stepping up in the absence of Matthew Morrell. I believe Matthew Morrell sat out the past 2 games with the lower body injury that he re-injured from earlier this season. Yeah. Devon Barnes had a pretty good game in the absence of Morrell this past game. Had 11 rebounds, and that's pretty good for a guy of his size, if you ask me. And he's also a great shooter as well. Ole Miss is 3rd in the SEC in scoring defense, 2nd in turnovers, force per game and not turning the ball over a lot. They're number one in turnover differential as well. So this team is heading in the right direction as well. I believe they're also a 6 seed projected team in that bracketology for the men's side. The rebounding is coming along. We talked about it before in the past, especially last year. The rebounding for this team is still not where it should be right now at this point in the season, but it's getting better. They're starting to out rebound other teams more frequently. But we're going to have to see where this Ole Miss team heads in the direction of SEC play. They have Southern coming up on Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the Pavilion. That'll be this Tuesday. So if you're in town in Oxford, be sure to get out there and watch Chris Beard and those boys play basketball this week. And I believe they play Memphis later this month, and that'll be probably the last big matchup before SEC play starts in January.
That's going to be huge, Cam. I want to start with that since, it's kind of where you finished off. Is Memphis just beat Clemson. They got a win over Michigan State. They almost won the Maui Invitational. They could play a little bit. So if you go to Memphis and get that win in a very hostile environment, I remember last year being in the Pavilion and being wowed with the amount of Memphis fans that were there. And it makes sense. It's an hour difference. I understand that. But look, that's a game where you go in and that is a huge resume booster. And you have a lot of those already. You beat BYU, then you went in and smoked Louisville, who's competing with teams like Duke and Kentucky if you're still paying attention to them. And now you have a chance to have a legitimate March Madness resume before conference even starts. So I'm excited for that Memphis game. Look, Cam, this is a good basketball team, and they're doing what good basketball teams do to bad basketball teams. You're beating them by 30+, and that's what happened against Southern Miss. Devon Barnes, man, huge shout-out. 11 boards? Yeah, that's some serious production coming there off a guy who, has been a really exceptional role player. I want to give him his credit here. He comes in, he's really productive. He doesn't make too many mistakes. And in a game like this against Southern Miss, where you don't really look at the stat sheet, oh my gosh, look, he records 11 rebounds, more than anybody on the team, especially not being a guy who's 6'10", 6'11", like Brakefield, McKeel Brown-Jones, those bigger bodies on the team. At Duke Lafke, playing 18 minutes, he comes in, makes a couple threes. I believe he only made one. Yeah, 3 points there. But, fans aren't going to like this comparison. The energy that he brings off the bench reminds me of Grayson Allen coming off the bench in 2015 for Duke in that national championship game. He comes in, and it's like a spark hits the team. Now, Duke Lafke's not a dirty player like Grayson Allen, but the energy that he brings and the ability to say, hey, pass me the ball, I'm going to make a three for you. And then the defense he plays with. This is a special kid who's going to continue to just go under the radar, which I love because I think that ultimately motivates him. But this is a 30-point win over an in-state rival. I say that loosely, over an in-state rival. But you're playing without Matt Morrell, probably your best player, most disciplined player with arguably the most experience on this team in the SEC. So you start to get Morrell back, you work some things out, you go to Memphis and hopefully take care of business. You're looking at a massive year coming in SEC play, who, by the way, this conference not only is the best in football, is now the best in basketball, and is always the best in baseball. Shout out to Greg Sankey in the SEC, man. This is insane. Tennessee went to Illinois, got a last-second buzzer beater win. It's massive. It's actually absolutely huge, Cam. I can't believe I'm talking about the SEC basketball in this fashion, but here we are, and it's going to be cutthroat, when this starts to get going here in January and February. But really promising stuff from not only the women's side of basketball and the men's side too, which, Ole Miss hasn't been in this spot in a very long time. So appreciate this, Rebel fans. Go support them. Go watch these boys. They're playing well, and they're looking for a couple more wins here before conference play gets going. When the students get back after Christmas break.
Absolutely. And this is an Ole Miss team that could be ranked in the top 15 when SEC play rolls around. If they can get a win over Memphis in Memphis, they could move into that top 15 area. They'll probably move up a little bit closer to that area today. Not sure what the rankings look like right now. They're probably coming out, if not already came out for this week for college basketball, but already 15th in the coaches poll. This team is moving in the right direction, like Zach said. The SEC is stacked in basketball. I believe there's 5 teams in the latest college basketball rankings that were in the top 5. I think Tennessee, Auburn, and Kentucky were all in that top 5. This is going to be a tough conference for Ole Miss to navigate through this year, but I believe they can win a lot of games. I believe they can win a lot more games than they did last year. Obviously, the lack of size is concerning for Ole Miss. But with the production of Malik Dia, Mikael Brown-Jones, and Jamin Brakefield, it seems like Ole Miss is set. Is dead set on using those guys on the front court at all points possible. Even Dre Davis at a lot of the points as well on the offensive end. We'll have to see what happens with John Ball as SEC play moves forward. It seems like you're probably going to have to eventually throw John Ball in there for a lot more minutes once SEC play starts and you start playing some more of these 7-foot guys, especially if Malik Dia is not able to guard some of these guys on the defensive end. So we'll have to see what Ole Miss does there. But seems like this team's moving in the right direction. We're going to have to see what they do later this month against Memphis right before SEC play, and that'll be big on what they do moving forward into conference play in January and moving into March Madness. I believe that's all we got for you guys today. Pretty big week for Ole Miss for recruiting, for basketball, for everything. Just make sure to keep up with Ole Miss. Me and Zach and everyone else on the Rebel Walk team will be keeping you guys updated with portal news, with guys entering the portal, with guys committing, with guys visiting. Just make sure to keep up with some of that watch list, with the transfer tracker on the Rebel Walk website. And I believe that's all we got for you guys today. So make sure to stay tuned to therebelwalk.com for all your Ole Miss sports needs.